it got me thinking, language is an invention for lack of something better. Right? We need the vehicle. We need the instrument to actually get our ideas out. If you stop and think as to how you think, you don't think in words. You think in ideas. Some people think in colors. Some people think in kinesthetically and so on. You have to translate that first in your head into some sort of code and get that code out.
True.
And so on. So ideally, we should all be speaking a language that would not need words. And the language of love, let's call it, or whatever. Anything that would be telepathic in a way and so on. That would be ideal. But we as humans can't do that. So language is the next best thing. But it's a crutch, right? And there are many crutches, and you have to make do with them.
Lexigo presents The Native Experience with your host, Brian.
Hello, world. This is Brian from Lexigo.com, and you are listening to the Native Experience podcast, the show that gets stuck in an elevator with Alanis Morissette. Our goal here on this podcast is to go beyond translation and localization and discuss creating truly native experiences for diverse audiences. Today, I am so excited. We are talking with Evandro Magalhães, former United Nations and Kudo, currently self-employed, by the way. I want you to check out something really quick before we get started with Evandro. Check out Scribe. It's the effortless solution for transcription, subtitling, and translation. With Scribe, you can translate and transcribe speech to text in record time, create on-brand subtitles instantly, and translate and create subtitles across 171 languages in just minutes. So if you've been spending all kinds of hours and frustrations and everything else on transcribing audio and video content, go check out Scribe. See what you think. Lexigo.com/scribe. All right, let's get into this with Evandro. He is a conference interpreter, former chief interpreter in the United Nations system, interpreter, trainer, and language technology advocate. He has interpreted for 2 American presidents, 5 Brazilian presidents, the Dalai Lama, and countless heads of state and government. Evandro is also the author of 2 viral TED-Ed videos and has published 3 books, including The Language Game, Inspiration and Insight for Interpreters. Evandro is also co-founder of Kudo, a disruptive platform that is revolutionizing the interpreting scene. Together with his peers, he helped shape the remote simultaneous interpretation technology and redefine how interpreting services are delivered worldwide. Originally from Brazil, he has lived on 3 continents and currently splits his time between the U.S. and his home country. Evandro, welcome to the Native Experience. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we're gonna have some fun today. We always have fun on the show. I got to tell you what, but we have a lot to talk about, and I'd love to hear a little bit about you. Talk about your family, your personal life, also what you do currently right now, and also what you're nerding out on for fun. There's a lot going on there, so have fun. Tell me about yourself.
Well, I'm Evandro Magalhães. I'm a language professional. Let's put it that way. I've played pretty much in every capacity in language services, all the way from just being a translator, somebody who was, first off, trying to learn languages and so on from Brazil, which is, 40 years ago was not the easiest thing to do without the internet and without anything.
Yeah.
Then later becoming a teach-yourself-translator, translating a few books, then going on to try and become an interpreter. And again, it was kind of teach-yourself-interpreting. Eventually creating an LSP, a large LSP in Brazil. From there going to the Monterey Institute for a master's degree in interpretation. And then from there, every door pretty much opened. And I stayed I worked in Washington, D.C. as a high-level diplomatic interpreter for about 3 years. Joined the United Nations as the chief interpreter of ITU for about 7 years. And more recently, left the UN and came back to the U.S. to found Kudo, which is a language as a service platform, RSI platform, which grew very, very, grew exponentially during the pandemic. It still continues to push very strongly.
Sounds like a really, really full life, which is awesome.
That's what you get as you age.
Yeah, that's what they tell me too.
Yeah. And again, the alternative is not very, very appealing.
True. So what are you currently nerding out on right now for fun? What do you do when you're not working?
When I'm not working, I'm trying to spend as much time with my family as possible. I was just back in Seattle to be with my daughter who works for Nintendo, lives in Seattle, Redmond,
wow.
actually.
Yeah.
And she's given us a 7-year-old grandson.
Nice.
And I have 3 beautiful children. Well, when I say children, the youngest is like 26, right?
Nice.
And they're all in different parts of the world, but it was a good family reunion. It was great to have them all in Redmond for a change. Now that I'm no longer with Kudo, I stepped down from my executive functions at Kudo about a month ago. So I have more free time, and I'm, kind of preparing a few more things to go back to the things that I really love. Teaching, coaching the new generation of interpreters.
Oh, good.
And also doing some consulting on the side. That's kept me very busy. But now I have more time to just also go on long walks and talk to my friends. And I'm often back in Brazil, which is where I'm doing this from, by the way. I just landed. So nothing too crazy, but boy, does it feel good.
That's awesome. Well, and I do want to talk about work-life balance later in the show today, because I know that's important to you too. And, talking about being able to spend time with your family and having that downtime is great. So we'll get into that. But also you're the author of, 3 books now. Is that correct? Plus 2 viral TED education videos? Yes,
I did 2 TED Ed video animations, right? One is very popular. It's called How Interpreters Juggle 2 Languages at the Same Time.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those short animated videos. What you do is you basically write the script, you sell it to TED. If they like the idea, they pair you up with an animator that will then create the animation in consultation with you. Mm-hmm. And it's used widely by schools and students pretty much. So I'm very proud of that particular piece because it's what I guess helped introduce and disseminate what interpreting is to a large population outside of the localization and language industry, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So that was very good. And the 3 books, the first one is a book on short stories that I wrote in Portuguese back many years ago. And you got to speak Portuguese to actually be able to read that. It hasn't been translated into any language. And then a book called, the literal translation in English would be His Majesty, the Interpreter.
Okay.
Of course, being facetious. And that's a book about interpreting. And that got translated into Spanish. I'm now working on a Russian translation and perhaps a French translation of that.
Oh, very cool.
And there's an English version of that book. It's not the same book. It's called The Language Game.
Okay.
Inspiration and Insight for Interpreters, which is kind of a rereading of that original book and translating it into English with a few new ideas and so on. So it's not the same book, but it's the same ideas, if you will.
So is it helping interpreters to get started in their career, or is it more of you're already in it and we're helping you to become better, best practices, insights, tips, that kind of thing? It's a bit of everything. Of everything. It's not a technical manual like, this is how you do shadowing. This is how you do paraphrasing. This is, these are the coping tactics. We do talk about that, but it's kind of opening the door and bringing people behind the scenes to say, listen, I'm going to give you a chance to step into a place you wouldn't otherwise be able to access. So I'm going to open the door of the booth to you. I'm going to invite you in. You're going to sit down. You're going to have the headsets on. And you're going to experience, as you read this, you're experiencing what it would be like to be an interpreter. What are the emotional constraints? What are the things that you would have to contemplate to actually put yourself in the picture? So it's very motivational. It does a lot for people who want to become interpreters and who've been told a lifetime that, this is not for you. To which I can relate very easily because I heard that sentence many times as I was trying to start out. So it resonates with me. So the book is, again, it's proving that interpreting is a trainable skill and that everybody's entitled to it if you have the drive and if you have the languages and if you want to do this. Yeah. Oh, I love it. And, it should be one of those things where it's a good fit or it really shouldn't be something that you get into anyway, because I feel like most positions really are like that. People get into positions, they probably shouldn't be there. So finding that good fit is a good thing anyway.
Yeah. With anything else, it's easy to try, right? I can try my hand at being an interpreter. And if I suck, people are going to tell me right away, but nobody's going to say, oh, no, it's not for you. Don't try this. Go back to your little corner.
Yeah.
In interpreting, that happens to all of us when we're starting out, right? Because
absolutely.
If you go back like 50 years and so on, you had to have a certain pedigree to be there, right? It was usually the family of diplomats and their siblings or their spouses and so on. So people who had a chance to travel abroad and so on. the world has changed. It's easy to learn a language. It's easy to travel. But until you've tried it, until you've put yourself to the test, you don't know if you can even do this.
Yeah.
Come, give it a try. Let's see if it's a good fit. But, what I did was open the door to make that possible.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, I'm curious about some of the localization and translation stories that you have. I would love to hear them, whether they're good or bad or funny or serious, personal, professional, totally up to you.
I don't have the typical background of a localization manager, right? So I've never held the title of localization anything, but everything I've done in my life has a huge component of localization. So interpreting, for starters. I mean, there's nothing that needs to be more localized than my delivery as an interpreter. As I'm talking to you, I have to be sensitive to the things that matter to you, to the things that you would understand, the context that would make sense for you as I'm delivering my interpretation. Okay, fine, it's English. But what kind of English? In what context? Are we talking miles? Are we talking kilometers? Are we talking pounds or kilo or stone? To be on a very pedestrian level, but it could go into your electoral system and what it means and the different figures of speech that the politicians use here. Yeah. How would that carry across to a different audience and so on? So I've always been very sensitive to it. So that has been a huge part of my experience. But the other aspect of localization that I've dealt with all my life is the handling of diversity. If you're talking localization, you're talking large teams of linguists and so on, and they all have their backgrounds, their languages, their idiosyncrasies and so on. And I've been managing talent and managing very, very high talent, I would say, for a number of years, for 10 or 15 years. Yeah. And that I got very good at. So it's, again, basically listening to them, letting them have it their way, trying not to impose your own way as you're trying to do this. Telling them what to do and letting them do it the way they think it could be done the best possible way.
Any particular fun people that we would know about that you've had run-ins with, experiences with, interpretations with?
Well, I have funny stories as an interpreter, right? So I have my own share of faux pas and I have my own share of interesting encounters, right?
Yeah.
So, but I know people like to hear the celebrity stories and the funny stories and so I'll tell you one or two. One interesting experience was I got stuck in the elevator with Alanis Morissette, for example. And it's crazy because I don't know if you've been around pop music celebrities. They have this thing where from the time they step out of a vehicle, let's say the limousine stops and they step out, they come out, their bodyguards come out with them. And from that point until they reach into their hotel room, nobody's supposed to talk to them.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. And I want to, I'm there to help communicate and I'm following along and I want to make them feel good and so on. And I'm talking and the guy's giving me a hard time, almost to a point where he's yelling at me, shut up.
Oh no.
So at a point where we needed to go into the elevator, he pulled me in. The bodyguard pulled me in because they didn't want to be alone in the elevator. That's for sure. And then the elevator doesn't move. It closes the door. In fact, in retrospect, I think the elevator was moving, but so slowly that you couldn't even feel that it was moving. It took like 4 minutes to go a couple of stories.
Yeah.
At a point, the guy started talking like crazy. And I'm thinking, now you want to hear my voice, huh? Okay, what about I don't talk now and let you experience this? I was a bit mad. It was a very funny story. But the thing is, once the door opens and the celebrity has been put in the room, usually the bodyguard comes out and says, "Oh, guys, listen, sorry, it's what we're supposed to do. I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy." So, and then eventually you can even have a cup of coffee downstairs because they spend their time at the lobbies waiting for the bosses to come out. Right?
Yeah.
So I had a few of those stories.
Oh, that's great.
And the other funny story, again, involving a celebrity is I was on my way from Geneva to Davos for the World Economic Forum. It was back in 2014, I guess. And the ride over is scenic. It's beautiful, right? Winding through the mountains in large piles of snow. And it's beautiful. So I have my camera out, my phone out, and I'm taking pictures like crazy. And in front of me, right now, sitting right across from me, you know how train seats are, right?
Oh, yeah.
You sit opposite one another. There's this middle-aged gentleman sitting there, looking very composed and so on. And he's looking at me with attention. At a point, he says, "Well, beautiful out there, isn't it?" And we start having a conversation. And the conversation goes on for like 40 minutes. And we talk about life, we talk about kids, we talk about everything. Perfect, normal conversation. And then at a point, I guess it started to bother him that I didn't recognize who he was, right? And then he started saying, well, what are you doing in Davos? I said, oh, I'm an interpreter. Is this your first time? I said, yes. What about you? Well, I'm going to speak twice. I'm actually a musician. I said, really? What kind of musician are you? Well, you could call it pop. You could call it this. And I have no clue who this guy is.
That's funny.
Eventually, he couldn't hold it anymore. And at a point, he said, by the way, the name is Peter Gabriel.
Oh, wow.
And then, the penny drops and I said, no, are you the Peter Gabriel? And then he says, well, on a good day, yes. And then we continued to have a very nice conversation. And the first thing I said to him after this is, look, I have a friend in Brazil who named his kid after you.
Oh, wow.
The kid is called Pedro Gabriel.
Yeah.
Because of you. And then we had a very nice conversation. But it was interesting because had I known who he was, I would have been probably starstruck, wouldn't have had a human conversation.
Yeah, so true.
So it was good that he only revealed his identity later. But look, if you see a picture of Peter Gabriel today and compare it to the sledgehammer guy that you see in the clips, two different human beings, right? I mean, the way they look.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell it's the same guy.
That's so funny.
So these are some of the stories. And again, I could go on forever because I have my own share of share of mistakes and crazy things we've done.
And mistakes are good because we can learn from those, and it's amazing how many times I'll have a conversation with somebody and I'll ask, how you got to where you're at. And they'll talk about it from the perspective of where they're currently at. And it's easy to forget what it was like in the beginning when you were making mistakes and how you learned from those mistakes. So, I'm curious if you want to share, at least one or two mistakes and what you learned from them. That would be a good moment for us.
But listen, interpreters don't like to say that, but they make mistakes all the time.
Oh, right? Of course.
In the booth, on the microphone, again, the chance of something happening where you don't have the right word or you don't know exactly where the conversation is going and so on, is huge, right? As an interpreter, of course, the more experience you have, the more you learn how to handle those situations, and you buy time and you correct yourself and you go back and things eventually fall in place, and everybody learns how to do that. But for a long time, you have no clue what people are talking about, say, for like those 10 or 15 seconds. So you beat around the bush a little bit and so on. So interpreters do make mistakes. Let me just make that very clear. And If you're listening to this and you are an aspiring interpreter thinking that, I couldn't really be an interpreter because interpreters are not supposed to make mistakes, forget that.
Yeah.
Good interpreting is like good conversation. You can take things back. You can correct yourself. There's space for all of that. It should be like this. Now, I'm going to go back to a story I've told many times.
Okay.
And it's my first day on the job. So I was working for the Brazilian parliament as a clerk. I was one of the few colleagues who spoke English in that section. And again, just typing stuff away. One day I get a call from the office of the Speaker of the House, and they say, Evandro, are you wearing a suit and tie? You got to be in a certain attire to go through a special place in the parliament. I say, yes, well, out of coincidence, I am. It's not every day. Come on down. I show up and they sit me down on a little chair at the corner of this long table in the office of the Speaker of the House. And I'm thinking, what am I doing here? And then eventually my boss comes. My boss was like a huge guy, like 7 foot tall. Says, listen, we have this visitor coming. And don't panic, it's Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. And we realized that we don't have an interpreter, so we'll have to make do with you. I said, what? Me? I've never done this in my life. Are you crazy? They said, no, you got this. You got this. Got what? I have no clue. I have no idea. As I'm saying those words, the entourage comes in with the prince and the press and a lot of people and so on. And I realized they brought an interpreter. I sighed, a big sigh of relief. And I'm trying to get out of that chair. My boss, the big dude he was, presses me down on my shoulders and says, you got this. We got this.
Oh, no.
And I said, well, okay. And then the conversation starts and it's chit chat, they're talking pleasantries and so on. And my heart is like pounding at 200 beats per minute. And I'm kind of not drowning. Let's call it that way. I'm trying to look, collected and all that. And it's going well. And it went well. Now, at the very end of that conversation, the Speaker of the House hands the Duke of Edinburgh a book all wrapped up in gift paper and says, Your Royal Highness, please accept the souvenir. It's a book on the riches of our Amazon forest. And the Duke, again, trying to be facetious and using this, his British type of humor says, Oh, the Amazon forest. I guess you mean what was left of it.
Oh, no.
Yes, because he had just been to the Amazon with the WWF. And then I froze. I said, shoot, that's not what you say in Brazil when somebody hands you over a present, right?
Yeah.
For that matter, it's not something you say anywhere in the world.
Well, true. Yeah.
And it's my first day on the job. And I'm thinking, did I hear that right? It can't be, right? So I'm not going to say that because they're going to think it was an interpreter mistake. So I just turned back to the speaker and I said, well, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Very, very kind of you. But the press was in the room. So half of the people had heard it in English and they kind of knew what it was. Some journalists came after me. I just tried to duck out of the room as fast as I could. That embarrassed me beyond measure, right? But everybody was very happy. The speaker was very happy. And I became the de facto interpreter to the Speaker of the House that day, who was also the Vice President of the Republic. So it's funny that I started my career at the highest possible level, if you will, talking to the royal family on my very first day. Yeah. So that's very unusual.
Oh, that's awesome.
But one thing, again, in retrospect, when I look back at that experience many years later, I realized that kind of interpretation is not just interpretation. Heads of state, they go around with their own personal interpreters because that person is a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
So if I say something that's out of line, the interpreter has been briefed as to what the message should be, and he or she can correct or maybe leave a cue out that allows the person to correct himself. Mm-hmm. So in retrospect, I might not have been totally wrong. And I got in trouble when I say that because still some purists are going to say, no, the job of an interpreter is to say everything is heard. I beg to differ. So as a diplomatic interpreter, personal interpreter to an authority of that caliber, your job is also to diffuse conflict to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think I didn't suck all that bad that day.
That's good. Well, I am not an interpreter by any means and not in that field. But at the same time, it was funny because I've always been fascinated with languages. I think I was on a cruise actually, and basically the people that were working were primarily Indonesian. So I thought, I'm going to learn as much Indonesian as I can on this cruise, just for fun. And of course, I didn't learn very much, but it was a few words, it was a few sentences. And I came back and I was working for a very large organization in the States. And I was just kind of saying, oh yeah, I learned, they're asking me, I learned some Indonesian and all that. Well, somehow word got around. And this goes back to your point on it's just a human conversation. A lot of times, you just want to be able to converse and connect with somebody. And that was my experience with this because the second in charge of this, again, large organization calls for me. First of all, I had to go see him. I thought I was in trouble. And he said, I understand that you speak Indonesian. No, I only speak a few words. Yeah. And he said, well, we have a delegation from the Indonesian government here.
There you go.
I don't know which specifically. And they said, we need you to go talk to them. And I seriously know a few words. I don't know what I'm doing. No, you've got this. Same thing.
Exactly. And that's what you get for boasting, Brian.
No, exactly.
It's same with me because I went around the place say, hey, I speak this and I speak that. Okay.
Yeah.
Serves you good.
Never say that again.
Never say that again.
I get in front of these people and they're all staring at me. There's probably 30 of them. Very, very professional. No smiles on any of their faces. And I said, I learned a few words. And so I said a phrase in Indonesian. And I said, this is what I learned. And the phrase was, I love you. And they just stare at me as soon as I get done saying it. And then they just erupt in laughter. Everybody is laughing so hard. And I'm going, what did I say? And the guy in the front goes, you just said there is a cat on your lap.
Wow.
And I said, wait, how did I get from I love you to there's a cat on my lap? And
listen, it's a tonal language, I presume, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. Yeah. But I thought, oh my gosh, I've offended these people. I failed. They're laughing at me. I think I'm fired. I walk outside. The second in charge comes up to me and I said, I'll go collect my things. Thank you for this opportunity to work here. He laughs and he said, thank you. That was the first time that we have gotten any emotion out of these people in a full week. You did that. You made them laugh. Thank you. He's like, it didn't matter that you got it wrong. He goes, you just made them feel welcome.
There you go.
And that's all it was. And I thought, oh man, but I messed up.
Communicate.
Yeah, but I tried and they respected that I tried. And so anyway, it was just, granted I was young. I was in college at the time. But I just think it's kind of funny that sometimes, it really is just a human connection.
It is a human connection. And again, I remember I used to be very, very stressed out. when I first started as an interpreter.
Yeah.
And I was panicking every time. Every time I went into the booth, I did my best. And as I came out, I thought to myself again, well, I was lucky again. So no disaster this time. I was lucky again. And then you do this 100 times and you think you continue to be lucky. And the thing is, when you are terrified of something, the more you have good experiences, the more your fear compounds, because it's like, let's say you're afraid of flying. Every time you board a plane and nothing happens, you think, well, I'm using up my lucky reserve. Next flight's going to be a disaster, right?
Yeah.
So you're almost building in your mind the story of, okay, I'm just closer, one step closer to a disaster. Until one day you realize that, listen, I must be doing something right. But what did that for me was an interview by Larry King long ago that I listened to, where he says that on his very first day on the job as a radio reporter or so, they turned his name into whatever it was into Larry King. The guy literally looked at the ad of a liquor on a magazine page and said, okay, we're going to call you Larry King. So, okay, you're live, go. And he froze. He panicked.
Yeah.
He drew a blank for like a full minute. And then the boss opens the door, cuts the microphone and says, listen, this is a communication business. For God's sake, communicate, say anything.
Yeah.
And then he opened up his mic and started by saying, listen, my name is this. They just changed my name. This is my first day in front of a microphone. So I'm very nervous. I'm going to do the best I can. My boss just came here and asked me to communicate. So that's what I'll try and do. Immediately, people listening on the other end say, wow, who's that loser? And then somebody else says, come on, it's the guy's first day on the job. Cut him some slack. Immediately, there's a human connection. And then he started relaxing into it. And again, the rest is history.
Yeah.
So, and his point was, the secret is that there is no secret. You got to be yourself and you got to communicate like you're communicating to somebody you care about. That's the whole point in translation. That's the whole point in interpretation. Of course, you have different levels of register that you need to be attentive to. But good conversation, good communication is one that prevents misunderstandings. And if what it takes to actually have that be the case is a round of back and forth and so on, better go into that and clear the air and do what's required than to leave something out that is not ideal and just trying to keep face,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not good.
No, and you're right about being yourself and just being natural and real with people, because I've been in the radio business myself. I've been in the podcasting side of things, emceeing in front of people. The thing that connects the most is me not getting all this crazy radio voice and sound. It wasn't about that. It was about, I just need to be a human being and I need to just communicate directly to that person. Yeah. Even if there's 10,000 people, I'm talking to one person at a time.
Exactly.
And the other thing you brought up is going in and having a conversation. You might have misunderstandings. If there's one thing that I've learned the hard way, actually two things, I'll say this. These are the two things. Listen. You need to not just listen, but you need to hear them. You need to understand what they're saying. And if you don't understand it, then clarify. And then number two is respect that person, regardless of whether they believe something or do something that's different than you. And then then you have your communication and your conversation at that point.
And if I could add to your great list, Brian, the one thing I learned helps me do a much better job is to try and get myself out of the picture.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
So when I go in the beginning, as you're learning the trade, right, it's all about you.
Yeah.
Do I sound right? Did I get it right? So half of your mind is going to your own delivery, your own projection.
Good point.
And half of your mind is thinking, does my colleague think I suck? Yeah. Does the audience get it right? And so on. It's a lot of self-checking, second guessing every word. The day you go into the booth and said, listen, I will do my best, but my point is to serve those backs of heads that I see from my booth here. So I'm going to be concentrating on somebody. I usually pick somebody in the audience and I'm talking to that person. And the focus is on them. I don't care. I'm trying to take myself out of the picture. I immediately improve my quality and my delivery.
Yeah.
Because, for example, interpreters and anybody who's tried this will resonate with this. When you get it wrong, let's say you got something, your word came, you didn't have the right synonym for it. Let's say you use something like halfway there. Immediately, as soon as you do that, your mind goes to a place where it says, you loser. How can you not know what that means? And so on. So you spend another 30 seconds beating yourself up, which means you've lost another few words that came after that.
Yeah.
But when you get it right and you find the perfect, semantically appropriate equivalent for something, part of you, if you're not trained, part of your brain is going to go, yeah, you really got that right. Kudos to you. You're really, well, today's my day. And that means you lost a few words as well that came right after that. You can't afford to pat yourself on the back or to criticize yourself. There's no time for that. So you have to concentrate on those people that you're there to serve.
Yeah.
That's a lesson that takes interpreters, I guess, years to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a pianist and I perform as well. It's very similar in that almost exactly what you're saying is the more you're focusing on the mistake you made or, oh, that was awesome. Guess what? The rest of the song that you're performing is done.
You make a mistake.
Because like you said, it's not about you. And they may be watching you and they may care about what you're doing and what you're saying, but it's a lot less about that than it is about how you make them feel. Same kind of thing, when you're conversing with somebody too, is I love what you said about take yourself out of that equation and just be there, listen, do your thing. They're going to be fine. And then evaluate afterwards. How did it go?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You were talking about something when you were flying on the plane. If you're afraid of flying and stuff like that, you might think, oh, that one went well, but I'm narrowing it down to like, it's going to go poorly. The thought that came through my head before you said that was the more good experiences you have, the more reinforcement that, hey, actually this is okay. So I thought, I guess you could look at it both ways as you start to say, okay, you know what? This is good. This is okay. I'm going to be fine. Breathe.
You do. But it's like people who are phobic, they avoid the thing they fear.
Of course.
If you put them in front of the thing they fear, firstly, they're going to panic. So you try to get them desensitized to that stimulus. And in time, they're going to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But you have to frame it correctly. So in my mind, what did it for me was the day I realized that, listen, any day I go into the booth, the possibility of my falling flat on my face is there. Yeah. There's this possibility.
Oh, yeah.
The more I do this, the probability of that happening is reduced to an infinitesimal quantity. So there's a difference between probability and possibility. And you have to choose what you want to believe. You have to choose where you want to live. Accept the possibility, but live in the probability. The day I made that separation in my mind, I was never nervous again, anywhere. So you can put me in front of any heads of state and so on. It's a human conversation. I'm there totally relaxed. I know I'm going to make mistakes. I may make mistakes. They may make mistakes, right? Totally. It's how conversations go, right?
Yeah.
The other day, somebody was asking me, why do we speak languages? Isn't language a great thing? Isn't language wonderful and so on? If you could speak just one language, what would be that language, right? Mm-hmm. It got me thinking, language is an invention for lack of something better, right? We need the vehicle. We need the instrument to actually get our ideas out. If you stop and think as to how you think, you don't think in words. You think in ideas. Some people think in colors. Some people think in kinesthetically and so on. You have to translate that first in your head into some sort of code and get that code out.
True.
And so on. So ideally, we should all be speaking a language that would not need words. And the language of love, let's call it, or whatever. Yeah. Anything that would be telepathic in a way and so on. That would be ideal. But we as humans can't do that. So language is the next best thing, but it's a crutch, right? And there are many crutches, and you have to make do with them. I hope I don't get in trouble, for saying that. It's not that I don't love languages. I'm absolutely, I have nothing but a sense of wonder about the linguistic diversity of the world. But the reason we speak a language is because we don't have a better way of communicating. Yeah?
No, I think that's incredibly fascinating, honestly, just because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about that and going, it's true. Even as I'm talking right now, I'm moving my hands and my arms around. It's just something that I must do. And, you think of ideas and sometimes you go, I don't know how to explain this idea in words. There's no way to accurately display it, because you're right. You're imagining it in your brain in a completely different way. It's probably more based on images, or in my case, it could be music. Or like you said, feelings, colors, there's all kinds of things. And you're right, language it's limiting in many ways. You talk about love or music, and that is universal, especially if it's instrumental, of course, then it's even more universal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fascinating. No, I think that's a really interesting thing. I love that. I don't think you get in trouble for that. I think it's a really good point.
Either.
I think it helps you too to really understand that this goes back to creating a native experience. It's not just the words spoken. There is more to the communication than just the words.
Yeah.
And you have to know
here's
those
the
things.
thing. Because of the language diversity in the world, because I see a lot of people up in arms and concerned that, languages are dying, right? Every 15 days, a language dies. And what we mean by that is that the last active speaker of that language has died, and he or she has taken that language with them. And why is that a catastrophe? Because again, if the end goal is just to communicate in a frictionless manner and more easily and so on, eventually the fact that you don't have a lot of languages and so on shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
The issue comes from not having had time to incorporate everything that's different in that language that just died into our way of speaking. There's a much easier way to mention something. There's the cue for a certain melody. There are recipes for food you will never otherwise taste unless you had time to talk to that person who just died. So that's what I think the diversity and the different ways of saying things and so on bring to the table. So in that light, language is a huge gift to humanity.
Yeah.
Because how people relate to snow in Greenland is totally different from what I could try and come up with if I'm an interpreter trying to find synonyms for that sitting in Brazil. Right. And if I'm a Tuareg, raised in Sahara, I may not have a word for green. I might have never seen that color.
Yeah.
And of course, the Inuit, they have thousands of ways to describe the weather, right? And the cold weather in particular and so on. So that's what I think makes it very, very interesting, and we need to keep it going. We need the language to be out there, and we need to keep them alive for as long as we can.
So what's your advice on how to do that?
Again, I think everybody knows what to do, but it takes money and it takes commitment. So many, many, many years ago, I read, I guess it was on Scientific American, a report about a professor in Alaska who made it the purpose of his life to make sure that before a language dies, it's been cataloged. Because, of course, you have untranslatable words, right? You have, for example, in Brazil, there's the word saudade, which is a kind of longing that's very specific. And there's no particular word in any other language.
Yeah, that's right.
To translate that. So you want to be able to understand that. And maybe, even if you have to explain it in a more convoluted way, you want to understand that there are different ways of expressing different emotions that you may not be used to, right?
Yeah.
It's the same with Schadenfreude in German, which is the feeling of, it's feeling good when when something bad happens to somebody you don't like, for example, right? In one word, right? You can describe it in many words, but you can do it in one word in every language, right? The other day, just yesterday in New York City, stepping out of a train, written across the platform was "Watch the gap." I can translate that into Portuguese into 3 languages.
Yeah.
Olha o vão. It means nothing. It means take a look at the gap, right? Take a look at the gap. You can still get your foot stuck there.
You're right.
These are the things that are challenging in localization and in language and so on, because you have to find the most appropriate equivalent as you're trying to get those things across. But back to your question, what it takes is a lot of funding. Okay. It takes a lot of grants. It takes a project that's well funded to get people in the field and interviewing those elders who are about to die, who are 90 years old and so on, and who hold the key to that chest of treasures before they go. Now, back in the day, Brian, I wrote to this professor and never heard back. I don't know if he had died at that point because he was already in his 80s. My idea, I had an LSP at that point, a large LSP in Brazil. My idea floating to him was, why don't we start a worldwide movement to get all LSPs to chip into a fund? Now, let's say 0.1% of their revenue goes into this fund every year to help fund those efforts, to go after those people, interview them, and do all the traveling, do all the data analysis, and so on and so forth. And again, the professor's probably gone, but here's something I would like to leave on the table. Why don't we do something like that? Why don't we pair up with the right researchers, the right institutions, the right universities, and get LSPs around the globe to contribute to a fund that could be used to that specific end?
Yeah.
So an idea I leave on the table for you.
Well, what's stopping them?
Well, somebody has to champion this. Right? Somebody has to shake those trees and get, persuade and convince people to actually do that.
There you go. So you got somebody who's willing to champion, and then honestly, once you build the team and start partnering with each other, that level of, I think, responsibility would be lessened significantly, and because it would just start moving.
Absolutely.
But you're right. You need that one person to start and do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Well, we have a lot more that I would love to get into, but I think we'd be pushing 2 hours or 3 hours if we actually get into that right now.
Time.
Yeah. So
time flies when you're having fun, right?
I know. And I love it. And yes, we've been talking about, interpreting, but I feel like most of the conversation can apply across the board, in localization. And so, but I know we want to get into some other things that you and I were talking about. So I'd say we do that as a part 2, if you don't mind. We could bring you back in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Great idea. No, again, there are many things that we left that we didn't have time to touch on, right?
Yeah.
So again, as you said, how do you provide a native experience beyond interpretation, and what's the underlying general concept here that we could explore in more detail?
Yeah.
And again, there's AI, there's technology, there's peer pressure, there's the whole social psychology behind this. There's the whole art of empowering people, usually very young people, with the right background to come into this new environment and take the baton and do the job that needs to be done. So ties in very beautifully into localization as well. I would love to continue the conversation. Absolutely.
Okay, that sounds great. I would love to do that. There's so much more to discuss, and it was funny because where our conversation went today, I'd planned on that, maybe taking about 15 minutes. But that's what I love, because the conversation can lead to areas that you would have never expected. And then that allows us to come back and do even more. So I'm excited to have you back on, but I really do appreciate your time. Even what we talked about today.
Anytime. I love the conversation, Brian. You're a great interviewer.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I had fun. I felt really comfortable into this. So I hope this has been useful for the folks listening out there.
Yes, absolutely. I had a lot of fun too. Evandro, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian.
I am so excited. We are going to be having a part 2 episode with Evandro Magalhães. Thanks so much for joining us. We so appreciate it. Love to hear from you. nx@lexigo.com. Shoot us an email. And remember, always strive for authenticity and embrace the power of native experiences.